Coming up on Life, Part 2. What happens when the kids get out of school and want to move back in? Who pays to support mom and dad when they need nursing care? And who gets what after they die? Tough issues, but we're here to help. And later, why do men die first? We'll meet a doctor who has the answers. Plus, battling the cliches of middle age. All coming up on Life, Part 2.
Major funding for Life Part 2 was provided by the Atlantic Philanthropies, engaging many to improve the lives of and achieve health and economic security for older adults. And by MetLife Foundation, celebrating the wisdom, talent, and experience of older adults. MetLife Foundation proudly supports Life Part 2.
Welcome to Life, Part 2. I'm Robert Lipsyte. My dad was in his late 90s when he showed me his will. He was leaving the old house he lived in to my sister, which was okay with me. I didn't want it, didn't need it, certainly didn't want to deal with selling it or fixing it up. But he also left her the contents of the house, the old piano, the furniture, the paintings, knickknacks, garden tools, thousands of books. And that made me sad and angry. For a long time, I just simmered and stewed. How could he do that? I had lived with much of that stuff all my life. Did he think I didn't care about it? Did he love my sister more than he loved me? Was he just not thinking about me? My wife told me to stop whining and confront him. My dad was tough and smart and a nice guy in old age. He could deal with my questions. But I was afraid of the answers. When I expressed my feelings to my sister, she said I could take anything I wanted. Somehow that made me angrier. Largesse from a kid's sister? Finally, I spilled it all out to Dad. His first response was, "Bobby, I never thought you were a sensitive guy." His second was, "Let's go change the will and split the stuff." Dad died a few months before his 101st birthday. That was nearly 5 years ago, and my sister and I have yet to deal with the house or its contents, the money part of the equation. I'm glad we were able to deal with the love part. And I'm glad we're dealing with it right here on the show with a group that isn't afraid to tackle the emotional side of finances. Ross Levin is a money guy who uses what's been described as a holistic approach to financial planning. He is a founder of Accredited Investors, Inc. and a columnist for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Jane Addams is a social psychologist with a special interest in relations between adult children and their parents. Her many books include When Our Grown Kids Disappoint Us, Letting Go of Their Problems, Loving Them Anyway, and Getting On with Our Lives. Chris Farrell is the personal finance guru of American Public Media's nationally syndicated radio program, Marketplace Money. He is also a contributing editor for Business Week magazine. Welcome all to Life, Part 2.
Thank you.
Can we start with the idea that a family needs to talk about money? Ross, when does a family need to start talking about money?
Well, we found with our clients the earlier the better. And sometimes you can talk too early, meaning that when the kids are very young and they don't understand what's going on. But generally speaking, to have these family meetings early on and discuss what your objectives are and talk about why these things, what they represent for you and why they're important, it really helps crystallize future decisions that you make, and it opens the door for really rich discussions way beyond money.
Well, assuming we have a 3-generation family here, the boomer, the aged parents, and the kids, which generation has responsibility of starting the discussion?
Well, I think it's the middle generation in a sense. I think the older generation has a responsibility, which is sometimes honored in the breach more than in the promise, which is to be open with their boomer kids about what their own needs are and about what, if anything, will be left for them. We're in the middle of an $8 to $12 trillion transfer of wealth between generations, and I'm talking about the end of the World War II generation to the boomers. But from my point of view, the generation that needs most to hear about money and that is least talked to about money is the youngest generation. And I say that because I believe their boomer parents have shielded them from anything like the financial facts of life. They have given and given and given. And too often that youngest generation has no idea how much things cost, or nor do they understand that, money is not like wine. It doesn't get better as it gets older. Their financial positions will not necessarily get better as they get older. In fact, probably while they're at home being fully supported and indulged, their financial position is as good as it's ever going to get.
Do you agree with that?
Well, on both of you, I think it's really important what you're saying about have these conversations and these rich conversations. But I think the circumstance that you dealt with your dad is more common. And so at least at a minimum with the older generation, before we go back to the younger one, with the older generation, at a minimum, because a lot of older people don't want to talk about money. They don't want to deal with it. And you can go to them and you could say, we should talk about money. It's none of your business. I'm not comfortable with this. So at a minimum, if that's going to be your attitude, then what the conversation has to be organized. Have everything really established and set up so we know where the will is. You've done your will. Have you done your will? Because it sounds crazy, but a lot of people, even with impending mortality, haven't done a will. Do you know where the bank accounts are? Do you know where the insurance accounts are? So at least at a very minimum, you want an organized life.
Well, one of the issues that you have with that boomer generation is that they don't want to appear greedy either. They want the information, but they don't want to feel like they don't want to make their parents think that they need this money or that they are waiting for this money.
Because I'm not responsible.
And then the issue for the older generation too is that often their financial decisions have not turned out to be the best ones, and they're embarrassed to tell their boomer kids, who they often feel are smarter and more capable.
But whose financial decisions often haven't been very good either.
Exactly. But I think that, again, it's a generational difference in terms of, money is the last taboo. We will talk about sex and religion much more often than we will talk about money.
Not in my house.
The oldest generation particularly.
But the so-called greatest generation had a great lack of trust. If they came through the Depression and the war, they knew that the roof could fall in, and they didn't trust anybody, including their kids.
Including their kids, that's right.
And also, money represented, and certainly I'm speaking for myself, to my parents, it represented independence, and they didn't want anybody controlling.
And they
it still does.
Those who are left, for them still, their money is independence, and even discussing it with their boomer kids, to them, feels like the beginning of being infantilized. It's not just about losing control, it's about being treated as though they're no longer relevant. And people in their 80s and 90s who don't have long-term care insurance, who are concerned, nobody wants to be dependent on their children. None of us has kids so that we'll be supported in our old age. And for most of us, I think even worse than the idea of dying alone and unloved is of dying as the object of our children's charity. We don't want that.
But it's not such a bad deal. You raised them, you educated
I
them,
understand
we
that, but
talk about college,
but we still
and I
don't
think
want
that
it.
is changing.
We
I think
still-
that is an attitude that is
Really?
actually changing, because think about when I graduated from college, the kids that went back home and lived with their parents, well, we didn't exactly say they were losers, but what was wrong with you? And now homes have gotten
slackers,
they're
right.
slackers. Well, homes have gotten bigger. Parents, the generation gap, I think, is really narrowed. People are much more comfortable being around each other. And I think as people live longer and are more attuned with their children, who are now the boomers, that there seems to be something of a shift going on that, yes, let's help out.
The other thing I want to mention is that I think that when we talk about all of these different kinds of things, we can talk in the context of this is how things work out, but the reality is it's messy. These family money issues are really messy. And
Why are they so messy?
Because money is love. Because money equates with love.
Do you
That's really the
agree?
reason.
Yeah, what happens is money
Or
is...
hate.
Or hate. Money is
hate.
the stage
Or
in
hate.
which all family issues get played out on.
That's right.
And I think that it can get really, really complicated. We're even talking, when you talk about kids moving home or doing those kind of things, I'm trying to picture with, how long people are living now, whether I want my 80-year-old twins to move in with me, my wife, when we're 110 years old.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that that's the case.
But why would you expect the money issue to be any different than...
You should live so long.
You should. I was doing that calculation there.
Because
but
the
you know,
other issues are
why
right
would the
there?
money issues be
'Cause
any
money's a
different than...
symbol.
Well, no, because it's just part of family. You wouldn't expect it to be any different than all other family issues, whether it's the Thanksgiving dinner or the resentments you have with your sister. Maybe she was a little bit favored at some points and you remember that. I mean, it's not really surprising.
Let's go back to this very emotional family meeting that we're having. Dad, your mom, our twin sons, whatever. Do you guys have any tips, the things that we should be thinking about, either going into this meeting or constructing this meeting?
I think that calling a family meeting makes everybody nervous. It's like the 4 worst words in the English language are 3, 4, we need to talk. I think that immediately, whether it's between a husband and wife or a parent and child, nobody wants to hear we need to talk. And so I think that immediately sets the tone of it as being something to be concerned about. I think in issues like this, it may be more comfortable to have the initial discussions with one child at a time.
I actually think to mention is that you can't necessarily control the emotion in the room. And I think that the emotion is going to give you information from which you can then have other meetings. But if it's just this completely controlled environment where everyone is prim and proper, you might not get to the big issues that you need to get to, like the kid doesn't want the cabin that the parents want them to have, or some of those other things that really come into play in these kind of situations.
But let's say we're in a situation where we don't have outside advisors, all right? So, and we're not talking about much assets, but you still want to divide things, you still want to have a discussion. I mean, just on a very practical level, if you think about any of your relationships, one of the worst things you can do is hold off, simmer in resentment, and then all of a sudden you bring it up. Well, you're going to have a conflict. And the longer you hold it off, the more you make it into a big deal, the more you get these explosions and these emotions and everything spills out. And all of a sudden you're no longer talking about inheritance, you're talking about things that happened 30 years ago. That's not what you want to do.
Talk about messy. Okay, when you're in an end-of-life situation and decisions being made, maybe justifiably, of extending this kind of useless, unhappy, comatose life, because in the back of your mind is, there goes Harvard. That must come up in your business.
It does, although I'll say it almost comes up the other way, where people are wondering, waiting sometimes for their parents to die, which is really an uncomfortable situation because they know they're going to inherit something. But the end-of-the-life issues are unbelievably complicated. I just went through that myself with my own mother. And I will tell you that it brings out the best and the worst in families, without a doubt. And I think that ultimately, the more the senior people can lay out what their expectations are and what their hopes are, the better it makes life for all the other kids that are going to be involved in the process.
One of the things that really strikes me, a lot of people are really fearful of outliving their money. And yet what's really important to them is leaving some of their money to their kids. And wasn't that long ago, I got a call from a woman in her early 80s, and she was really panicked. She was going to run out of money within 3-4 years. What could she do? I said, well, if you didn't leave the money to your children, would you run out of money? He goes, no. So I said, well, talk to your kids. They're going to want you to spend the money on yourself. But I do think that's really one of the big divides. And the important thing there is, when you were telling your anecdote before, in a way, those gardening tools, they're a lot more important than the value of the house. And most kids, boomers, are going to want their parents. And I think the kids of the boomers will want their parents to live out their life well.
Yeah.
And the money inheritance is big transfer. Hey, the really transfer is the painting, the sentimental stuff. But that's the stuff you also got to talk about, because if you want to talk about fights or disagreements, it's on the sentimental stuff. It's not on the money.
You can
That's
divide
pretty,
the money, but
the money
the
you can
stuff-
divide.
the
That's
stuff-
mathematics or arithmetic.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope that we just have to deal with the easy stuff like sex and religion. Thank you all so much for joining us on Life Part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Marianne Legato is the founder and director of the Partnership for Gender-Specific Medicine at Columbia University and the author of the bestseller, Why Men Never Remember and Women Never Forget. Recently, she's turned her attention to men's health with Why Men Die First. And that's just one of the questions I was eager to ask when I sat down with Dr. Legato. Dr. Legato, welcome to Life Part 2. What we'd like to do is create a hypothetical couple, late boomers in their 50s. Stereotypically, maybe she's a year or two younger than he is. The kids think they're grown. In any case, they're out of the house. Elderly parents, concerns about job insecurity, and life in general, and kind of give a kind of dual health profile
Fine.
of these two people. And I'd like to start with the heart.
Yes. Well, men, unfortunately, experience coronary disease about 20 years sooner than women in general, and it's the chief killer of men in their 40s. The interesting thing about your question is, what is the kind of aging that man and woman will experience together, and are there differences? Women have a sort of cataclysm of change when their hormone production starts to fall off in their 40s generally, in the so-called perimenopausal period, when their levels of estrogen rise and fall unpredictably. And they have some of them, a very profound reaction to that. They have a lot more instability of emotions. They take everything very personally. Their sleep is disturbed, and they become anxious. Many of them have heart issues like palpitations and begin to have the first pangs of mortality in that they begin to experience chest pain. Mm-hmm. Men don't have that kind of cataclysmic hormonal change. Their testosterone, which is the primary hormone that fuel men mm-hmm. and their behavior, falls gradually and slowly until the end of their lives. At the end of their lives, say in the 70s and 80s, men and women resemble each other from a hormonal point of view and settle down into a comfortable relationship.
And they look like each other, too.
Yes, they look like each other.
And their dogs.
Right,
yeah.
And their animals, right. And they have a comfort in each other's presence if mm-hmm. the marriage survives and the relationship survives.
Well, whether or not the marriage survives, let's talk about whether these two people, our hypothetical couple, survive.
Right.
Before we move on to another disease, is there something that they could have been doing for each other?
First of all, what men can do for women during this perimenopausal swing period is to be steady, comforting, and to defuse some of the emotional turmoil that's going on, and even to suggest hormonal treatment if the peaks and valleys become too intense. From the woman's point of view, it's really important to know that the depressed male does not talk about it. And as men crest, especially in this grim economic situation now, into a part of their life where they've lost their job and any status they may have had from their job, men are going to be depressed in far greater numbers, I think. Now, when a man is depressed, he doesn't chat. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't ask for help. And he becomes more and more isolated characteristically, unlike women who have no problem reaching out, seeing their doctor, calling their friends. I think a woman who sees her husband, particularly if there have been financial reverses or he's been fired or lost his job, should be very sensitive to increasing silence, irritability, heavier drinking, even sexual peccadillos, which may arise for the first time in his life.
And during this period, men are changing, and as you said, becoming more like women in some ways.
And women more like men.
Yeah, I mean, could you describe, what's happening?
Well, as women are freed, if you will, from the tremendous push of premenopausal hormones, they begin, as Margaret Mead said, to have an exhilarating opening to the possibilities of life around them. Many of them have a new interest in themselves, those who are not narcissistically trying to look as though they're 20, which I see in my practice and makes me quite sad. But they find new intellectual interests, they have less responsibility for their children, and they turn from inside the home, if you will, to a larger outside world, which can be threatening to the man who is on the other side of that, and his world is narrowing as his position looks less and less certain.
And he's becoming, with less and less testosterone,
Yes.
he's becoming more timid.
Exactly.
Less, risk-taking.
Right. Feels pain more.
Yeah, and she, in our hypothetical couple, she will eventually become the dominant
Often.
Yes.
Often. And the man becomes very dependent because once that river of retirement is crossed, men, not just because of their testosterone falling off, but because, as one of my favorite male companions told me early in my career, the bottom line of life is how much money did you make? Once those criteria of who I am and work and how much money I earn are gone, a man will become, in many instances, very dependent on the one thing that is still secure, which is association with his wife. And I have had men drive their wives literally practically crazy by following them around. Many women have said to me, if he would only let me alone, I dream up reasons to leave the house, and he insists on coming with me.
I mean, so much of this is medical, of course, but as you point out, the male conditioning to suck it up, hang tough, not go in until they're really sick.
Bob, that's such an important point that you make. The socialization of men from the time they are born is a tremendously important contributor to why they die first. We definitely treat little boys differently than little girls. As you say, suck it up is the way we tell our sons to bear pain and physical disability.
And one point that I thought was, for personal reasons, one thought was really important in your book was that boys have to give themselves testicle examinations,
Nobody tells
just
them that.
as urgently as women
Right.
examine their breasts for lumps.
Right.
And nobody talks about that.
Of course not. In fact, I have grown men, very grown, 60 and 65. Between 50 and 60, there's another peak of seminoma, which is testicular cancer. Nobody tells men that. They have no idea what I'm talking about when I ask them if they examine their own testicles. And doctors simply don't put that down as part of their preventive strategy for men.
So, we're weaker, we're more vulnerable, we don't take care of ourselves properly. And the two basic things that we're here to do, procreate,
Right.
which eventually we can be replaced at, I suspect, and make war, which we should eliminate if we can. Are we ultimately, I'm speaking for my gender, irrelevant?
I think men are essential to women's happiness at every stage of life. And I think the excitement of sex for men and women is one of the primary fuels of life. I don't think it's going to go away. I would be very sad in a world without men.
Dr. Legato, I'm going to tell this to my wife.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for joining Life Part 2.
It's a pleasure.
Ron Freed, one of this show's producers, is the author of 3 books. For Ron, getting older presents the same challenges as writing a good sentence or producing a good TV show. It's all about avoiding the cliches.
I'd like to tell you a story about a friend of mine. Let's call him Ron. It's my name, but somehow the name seems to fit. Anyway, Ron is a TV producer and writer in his early 50s. His favorite living novelist, Martin Amis, says that literature is engaged in a war against cliché. Ron likes to think of himself as a soldier in this war. But Ron is beginning to see that in middle age, the clichés accumulate as quickly and dangerously as plaque in the arteries. There's the cliché that things used to be better. When Ron watches a band on Saturday Night Live, he dismisses it as a second-rate version of some band that he liked years ago. That's sort of pathetic of Ron, isn't it? Here's another cliché. Ron has begun to brag that he's been in the TV business for 30 years. He tells the young people he works with anecdotes about dead celebrities, even though he realizes that the young people don't know what he's talking about. To be honest, this is starting to make Ron a bit of a drag. So, what can Ron do? Well, banishing nostalgia from his conversation would be a good start. Making sure there's something on his iPod that was recorded after 1979 would also help. So would dragging his butt to the multiplex to see some new movies, even though Ron thinks that multiplexers have ruined the movie-going experience and that the last great American director was the late Robert Altman. Ron might also consider going on Facebook, even though it strikes him as a stupid waste of time. Yes, Ron certainly needs to make some changes. Otherwise, Ron will become a parody of himself. Just another middle-aged bore talking about the good old days. I like to think that Ron can do better than that.
I agree, Ron. The war against cliches must be won at all costs. For now, that's it for Life, Part 2. Thanks for joining us. See you next time, older and better.
Are you ready for Life Part 2? Find information, inspiration,
All I can tell you is getting old is not for sissies.
and insight on life after 50 on pbs.org.
Thank you.
Major funding for Life Part 2 was provided by the Atlantic Philanthropies, engaging many to improve the lives of and achieve health and economic security for older adults. And by MetLife Foundation, celebrating the wisdom, talent, and experience of older adults. MetLife Foundation proudly supports Life Part 2.